Like a lot of boys who have just hit puberty, I definitely started watching porn and like loving it. So I started talking to everyone else around me in my age range, you know, throughout junior high and high school. Every year I confirmed more and more that I was the only person who was serious about doing this. I was like, what is wrong with everyone else? Why the hell doesn't anyone else want to go do porn? Like, this seems like the fucking best job ever. And so I did it. I'm Chad Fjerstad, I'm 35 years old, and I grew up in the suburbs of St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is where I do everything, all day, every day. At least through the pandemic, you know? Music, writing. I got this sub recently. I was like, hey, there's no downstairs neighbors, like, I might as well get a sub and rock it until they move in. They moved in the next day.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Well, there was a big shift right in the middle of my childhood years because my parents got divorced when I was 11. Naturally, as a boy, you're drawn to aggression. You're like watching wrestling, you're playing with toy guns. Culture all catered to aggressive stuff when you're a boy in the 90s. That mixed with the teen angst that formed after the divorce, it's like all of a sudden like, oh, like the really aggressive music now just feels right. That led to me being interested in art. And I think the first thing in my life that really gave me direction was the band I started when I was 15 years old, and it was a melodic death metal band called Nehemiah. Right from the very first show, I felt immediately like I was part of like a scene, which I was, which was the Minneapolis metal and hardcore scene. So that was still to this day maybe the most powerful thing. Driving across the country for the first time and really getting to see other cities, and that's the most magical part to me, is just getting to meet so many different types of people all over the country and eventually all over the world. Dead to Fall did some Canadian tours and 2 full European tours. When I was a 21-year-old in Europe the first time, I was like, this place sucks. I mean, I was such a little naive, ignorant little asshole at the time. I didn't have an appreciation for culture yet. I didn't. And then the second tour we did, I started to vibe with it. And then of course I didn't go back to Europe until last year, 2019, with the Primals. Now being there, it's beautiful now. Like, I would love to go back any chance I get. In 2006, we had a day off in Long Beach and we were staying with our friend Chelsea. The night before, she was like, oh, I have a roommate who just started doing porn, you know, like, you should do a scene with her. And I was like, all right, whatever, yeah, hell yeah, let's do it. But I was kind of taking it with a grain of salt. But then later that night, she was at the apartment then, and she was like, so will you do a scene with me tomorrow? And I was like, yep, okay. And so then the next night, like, some guy just came over with a little fucking hi-8 camera. I signed some paperwork. He gave me a condom. And then he was like, all right, go ahead. I had to write down a stage name for the first time that day. I put Vin Varicose. So that was my stage name until about early 2010. Because once I realized that if I'm trying to do this as a career, like, I shouldn't have a name that turns people off and disgusts them on purpose. So I went with something much more simple, which is now Chad Elva. Another interesting thing, and I'll say this because that website doesn't exist anymore. No one told me I was supposed to get paid or be tested. It took me a while to realize it. Probably 2/3 of the artwork in my room is sort of representing women in distress. I think it's just a combination of growing up infatuated with both horror films and women. Björk just has a really special energy. That was one I literally just found in a dumpster behind a record store in like high school. and she's just like a really inhuman human. I kind of have an affinity specifically for some specific actresses from the late 70s, early 80s, usually ones who are in psychological horror films, because that's like my absolute favorite pocket of film ever. Natasha Kinski in Cat People, a very, very special movie, very bizarre, nothing like it. This is a German poster for Roman Polanski's film Repulsion. The lead actress, Catherine Deneuve, it's about like men won't stop coming onto her, and she's just like, it drives her crazy, literally, like she goes insane. And it was Polanski's like second movie. Yeah, I was going through some hard shit during when I was experimenting with drugs the most, like real drugs, you know, hallucinogens and stuff like that. You know, when you're in love with someone, what it feels like to truly be betrayed. And then I watched Altered States during that period, and it kind of is about both of those. You know, scientists, like, he becomes obsessed with taking large doses of hallucinogenic drugs, but in sensory deprivation tanks. At the same time, he's like working on a relationship, and he's like supposed to get married, and it's a very cliche message. It's love saves all. And I feel like that's the ultimate movie for me. That's about love saving all. I think kind of the female attention and the energy that I was constantly receiving did help give me the confidence to transition into the porn industry. I think it gave me that boost. I was like, well, I've had a passion for it forever. I've always wanted to do it. So it seems natural to just step from one of my passions right into the next. But the funny thing is, it was more, for me personally, it was actually more of kind of a rude awakening when I got into porn, because I just felt like nobody saw anything in me. Like I had no worth, you know? I went from my ego being on fire, like I was just like, oh, like, I love life, to just being like, you're nothing, like you're worthless. Even through that period, things that were gonna make my life harder, if it was the honest thing to do, I continued doing it. But around 2 years in, I started focusing on art again. And as soon as I started focusing on art and creating again, guess what happened? I became happy again, I started making new friends, and I started doing well in porn. It's a very specific kind of sex when you're having sex for a porno. But it's its own thing entirely. There's an understanding that everyone's there to do a job. There's so much more that comes along with it psychologically when you're having sex in your personal life. I want a partner who is sane. Like, I want a partner who can manage relationships and their life, and who can do the things that they need to do, but who's also a perverted freak. And that's the tricky part, because usually perverted freaks have some damage. But I need that middle ground now, like that perfect middle ground where it's like, this is so personal. So one of the most inspiring artists and musicians to me, Geneva Jacuzzi, we collaborated on a video together, and this was our baby in the video. What else? So Apollonia St. Clair, I've been a huge fan of her for a while, and I was surprised that I was able to get her to do the artwork for the cover of my anthology book, Split Lips. She did an original piece for me, and so that book has a very striking, awesome cover that I'm very happy to have on there. But I was looking through more of her merch available. I just really, really loved this specific piece of hers. I like seeing them every day. The look they're giving and the energy they give off. It's funny how a lot of people come in here and they're like, oh, but her nipples are so big. It's like, it's perspective, bro. It's because the camera's down here, come on. In Deadfall, we were touring full time. Technically, you're homeless then when you're not on tour. Along with that lifestyle, there's a lot of partying. That is the one part of touring that got a little old for me. And I had just read Chuck Palahniuk's Choke, and it was kind of the first novel that I had read as an adult. And I was like, this book is a lot of fun, and it was great, but I truly feel like I could write books that are just as entertaining and just as well structured. So I almost immediately started writing my first novel. It's called Popping Cherries. It's a kind of a twisted, semi-perverted supernatural coming of age story, my coming of age story. But I spent a lot of time sitting in the van or the green room with my first laptop working on that book. So that was a kind of a turning point for me in a sense. Okay, so I've put out 2 fiction novels, 2 short stories. Split Lips, stories about love and sex, and one called The Shrieking Garden, which is about childhood trauma. I only have 1 short story in each of them. The rest of them are primarily people who are friends and acquaintances of mine in reality. But yeah, I picked them because I knew they would have entertaining stories, and they did. Popping Cherries is like maybe 40% based off of reality. Worship Satan is more like 80% reality. The book starts from the point where I got kicked out of Nehemiah. That led to me experiencing a real depression for the first time in my life. So then I bought my first synthesizer. It's pretty much the only interesting thing in the room. Underneath the unicorn lies all my synths. Here's the infamous microKORG, the first one I ever got in 2005. Still the most important instrument I've ever owned, just because it saved me from that depression and made me want to start writing my own music for the first time. This baby is special too. Roland's JX3P. The stars are on there. Tamara Sky put those on there because we had literally just started having more ephemeral band practices. We're getting ready for the first live performance, and then the pandemic started. Music still primarily functions as a therapeutic or meditative exercise for me. It's the most reliable way for me to maintain my sanity. I really do feel like the pandemic is kind of forming a potential end for a lot of group music projects. I think that's going to leave me to focus even more on my self-sustained music projects. So I have electronica I've released under my surname, Fjerstad. I have a synth pop project, or minimal wave, new wave, whatever you want to refer to it as. More ephemeral. And I actually just finished creating my first full film score for a feature film. I would like to be perceived as someone who has an impressive body of work. Like, that's what's important to me. The people who do have a legacy, they are the ones who inspire me. The idea of being remembered in the same manner as the people that you look up to, you know? It's 2020 and almost everyone is going down the path of strict activism, which is a completely admirable thing. But I think it's important that for people who identify as artists to continue creating art. Evidence shows that with the progression of technology and the way we're headed as a species, as we move towards the singularity, it's very likely that we could somehow all come to this point where we're all the same. We need that display of real individualism to keep us all feeling sane, I think. If everyone were to let go of their persona and art was gone, individualism would go too. And I can't really imagine anything more dystopian than that.